Hi guys, Squirrel here and welcome to my top tips on getting started with Cities Skylines 2. I've been very fortunate to be able to play this pre-release, and in this video I'm going to give you my top tips to get going in this wonderful city building game. Tip number one are the graphics settings. Now there's no getting around this. Skylines 2 really pushes your graphics card. When you first start the game, you're probably going to notice that things aren't running quite as smoothly as you want, and when your city gets bigger, that is only going to get worse. So I'm going to show you some graphics settings for you to change. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but you can definitely use these settings to get some frames back and use this as a starting point to tweak things for your own settings. So start off by heading over to your graphics settings, go to the Simple tab, and I recommend setting your depth of field mode to disabled. Next thing is I recommend setting dynamic resolution scale quality to disabled or constant. If you're playing on 1440p or 4K and you're willing to sacrifice some visual quality for some FPS, then put it on constant and slide it to 50%. I don't recommend automatic because it does lead to some very obvious texture popping. Next thing you want is to set cloud settings to low. You don't look up that often, and low clouds still look more than adequate, and they will give you some FPS back by having it on a lower setting. Next, you want to set all of your volumetric quality settings to disabled. Maybe in the future we'll be able to enable this, but right now you need to keep it on disabled to give yourself some FPS back. Now you want to set your depth of field quality to disabled. And then finally, you want to set your motion blur to disabled. I don't know why this is in games, but, you know, disable will definitely help. Now, heading over to the Advanced tab, there's a couple of settings that I recommend. Firstly is the anti-aliasing quality. I have found that TAA low 2x gives pretty much the best looking anti-aliasing and still keeps a good frame rate. So try that out and see what you think. The other option I would recommend is shadows. Now, shadows always cripple frame rates. And I found that on Skylines, you can set your shadows, I can find them, to custom, and then drop your resolution down to 32. What you'll see is you get nice soft shadows, but you definitely get a boost in frame rates. Final thing I'd recommend is going into the NVIDIA control panel for this game and locking the FPS to 30. It made a big difference to how smoothly the game runs on my settings. Now, the other thing that you might want to change is under the general, and you might want to, under gameplay, you might want to set day-night visuals to off. It keeps it in daytime, obviously, but building at night is really difficult. So that's a personal thing. Right, let's crack on with some other tips. Our next tip is around road building. Now, road building is quite different to Skylines 1. It's more like Skylines 1 with the old engineering mod, but with a paradox twist. However, there are some new things in there that were not in the engineering mod. So it's worth spending some time understanding this because you will be doing a lot of road building. And when you click on the road icon down here, you'll notice a whole bunch of options. Top is the tool mode. Obviously, you've got your point A to B straight line. You've then got what's called a simple curve. You start off by clicking once, drag, and then when you click again, you'll then get a curve option, which when you click for a third time, will actually put it down. Now, it's worth paying attention to what's going on here because there's some information that's given to you. For example, you'll notice straight away that it's starting to snap towards certain things. It's snapping towards grids, it's snapping towards existing geometry. These are all toggleable down here. If you just turn them off, you don't get any of that. And if you just want some of it, you can selectively turn it off. But it can be useful to line up roads with other roads. For example, if we click here and move along, you'll see there's a bunch of information given to you. 90 degrees tells you the angle between this and the last piece. If I move it around like that, you'll see that disappears. We have a snap 90 turned on. If we turn that off, we don't get that anymore. It also shows you the length of the road and it shows you the elevation. Now, the elevation, it says, is 0.6. Not that important for vehicles that still manage to go up and down it. However, in terms of the look of the road you're trying to make, it can make a big difference. If you want to change that, page up and page down will do it, but you'll see it's quite a big jump. You can control that by changing the elevation step down here. Now notice the elevation when I press up now, it goes up 1.25 meters at a time, which gives you a lot more fine-grained control when you're putting a piece down. The other thing to note is when you do click, for a curve, you then get the position of where you originally clicked relative to where you're now moving, so you can snap again at 90 degrees. So if you want a perfect geometry piece, you can see the first one is 120 meters long. The second one I could make exactly 120 meters long, and at 90 degrees I know I'm going to get a perfect arc. Now this is useful when you want to build a one-way roundabout, for example. There are prefab roundabouts in the game, but of course, you know, you can construct your own. But this is how you would do it. You just make each piece 120 meters long, and at 90 degrees to the last one. And there you go. You can now do perfect roundabouts in this game. Worth mentioning the delete tool. When you press B for bulldoze, you don't just have to delete one piece at a time. You can hold it down and draw and delete the whole section, which is incredibly useful when you're deleting geometry that's gone underground, such as intersections and that kind of thing. So there is another mode. There's a complex curve, which is just an extension of the previous. You click once, click again, and you click a third time, and then click a fourth time. And that lets you build lovely sweeping curves like that. And then this one here is just a continuation of that. You just keep on going endlessly for as long as you want. Final thing to mention is the parallel mode. Now, parallel mode is very useful when it comes to when you're building, say, one-way roads, such as a highway. When you put it, traditionally in Skylines, when you built a road, you'd have to try and line up the reciprocating one-way piece like this. But now you've got parallel mode, which when you toggle on, automatically constructs both pieces, and you can even control the offset between the two. But this is great when you want to sort of elevate upwards and build, for example, a banking curve like that. This kind of thing used to be very tricky to get right in Skylines 1, building perfect sort of sweeping highways that stick together and don't look a bit naff. So there's definitely a lot of stuff in the road building there that you want to pay attention to. The final thing to mention, I guess, is the upgrading. So when you want to upgrade a road, for example, let's say we put down a 4-lane piece down here, like that. So let's just do a straight piece. Put down a 4-lane piece, and then we bring in a 2-lane piece like that. Like so. Oh, I forgot to mention roundabouts. Roundabouts are available in this game now. You can, of course, make your own roundabout, but there's prefab roundabouts which are extremely nice. But let's just draw that into there as a thin one like that. There we go. So if you want to upgrade a road, let's say you want to make this a 6-lane road instead of a 4-lane road, you choose this option here, and then you choose the upgrade option to replace it. Now you'll notice that when you put this down, you get a couple of options as to how it's offset. You need to pay attention to what's going on with the lane markings on this one, because you'll see they do vary depending on which option you go for. And this applies to all aspects of upgrading. So if you're upgrading from 2 to a 4 like that, if I just drag that out like this, let's say you've got a 2-lane coming in like that, a 2-lane coming in like that, you think, oh, I want this to be a 4-lane. You can just upgrade it straight away, but there's 2 options to how it's upgraded, and it affects the way that these things intersect with each other, and you might have to come back later and delete them. It can be slightly confusing at first when you're doing it, but it doesn't take long for you to get used to how the upgrading tool works and make it do what you want it to do. You can see what it's done there, because that lane is now merging into this lane, so I could upgrade this on this side, or I could upgrade it on that side, and that will make it a lot more parallel for the traffic to run through, and it won't have to keep changing lanes. It's something you need to play with to get used to. Finally, you've got toggle underground mode, which is great when you're sort of building your tunnels, because if you want to build along like this and then go down like that and then do an underground tunnel, then come back up again, once you're in ground mode, you don't normally see what's going on there. I haven't gone deep enough, have I? You don't normally see what's going on there, but if you then toggle that option, it will show you what's going on underground. The other thing to pay attention to is this, which is the contour line. If you toggle this on, it can be very useful, because it's obviously, if you build along a contour line as opposed to building up and down a contour line, it can make a big difference. That's road building in a nutshell. Give it a play, get used to it, play with those tools, and pay attention to what it's doing when it shows you this information here, because a lot of that information is extremely useful to getting perfectly lined up roads. Right, pathways. Let's talk about pathways. They're often overlooked by people starting out in Skylines, but something that's not only incredibly useful because they allow your Sims to traverse between roads and get around and walk and stuff, but they're actually visually they can make a big difference to the design and layout of your city, and also they can affect the way things are built and shaped. And let me explain what I mean. So if you click on the landscaping tool and then go to pathways, you'll see there's a pavement path here. So I've already drawn a pavement path between these roads. So what I do is I lay my roads down and then I'll set about thinking, well, where would my Sims want to get around? So for example, there's a crossing here. So if you was in this block and you wanted to get to over here, without any kind of pathway, you're probably going to have to walk all the way around that way. So you might want to consider, well, let's build a pathway like this and just simplistically draw those two together. And that's going to help your Sims get around. But there's a few subtleties to what's going on. So for example, notice the grid square here. We can build on this. We can put a building there, commercial, whatever, doesn't matter. If I select it to be built here, I will knock out this one and this one. So I'll reduce the building space. That can be good. That can be bad. We can actually make it bigger, because if I then turn off snapping, if I want to get rid of more blocks, for example, if I build between these two, I can actually knock out a bigger chunk. And that creates space between buildings. And creating this white space is often what makes your cities just look more lived in and not just a big line of blocks. So you could do it further down as well. You could perhaps do one here as well. And then you could go across like that, join it onto maybe this pathway. And that has changed the way that buildings are now laid out. So this has been a big rectangle. This is now two smaller independent buildings with pathways in between. And it just looks more natural. So don't forget, when you're building your cities, build pathways. And of course, all the curve tools that we just looked at also apply here. The final thing to point out is that when you do build a pathway, you can optionally connect it with a pedestrian crossing like that. So you can build your pathway in, and if you pull it a little bit further, you'll notice it puts in a pedestrian crossing here, which if you've unlocked the road services upgrade, when you go to roads and then road services, you can actually click on crosswalk there and right click to remove it if you didn't want it, or you change your mind later. But pathways is something that you can use to construct really nice looking cities, and also just makes it much better for your Sims to get around. The next tip is around pollution, and you can probably see I'm on an industrial zone here and there's some pollution going on. There are 4 kinds of pollution in City Skylines 2. You can see them by clicking on the info view up here, and they're at the bottom. Air pollution, ground pollution, noise pollution, and water pollution. They all affect the city in different ways. Now, air pollution, you can choose, and you'll see that industry, of course, tends to produce air pollution, and it's then blown by the prevailing wind, which never changes through the game as far as I can tell. It then, blows it into your city. Now, in the early game, I set up the Holland district here, and all was good. But as it got bigger and bigger, it generated more pollution, and that blew down here. And I'm basically having to get rid of these homes because, as you can see, air pollution is now negatively affecting the Sims that live here. Then there is ground pollution. Ground pollution is something that, generally speaking, doesn't matter too much, except, let me show you an example of where it does matter. Over here, I think there's a water source right there. I've removed the industry from here because it was too close to the city now, so I'm starting to get rid of it. But there was a water source right here, and it was contaminated. Like, ground source water is something that you can use to drink, but if you built industry near it, it contaminates the water, and then you can no longer use it to drink. So that's something to be aware of. Otherwise, ground pollution doesn't have a terrible effect on things. Then there's noise pollution. Well, noise pollution is caused by some major buildings. High-density commerce produces a lot of noise pollution, and you don't want that to be too near your Sims. Railways, stations, schools, that kind of thing. The big, wherever people gather and do stuff, is generally quite noisy. Interestingly, this landfill over here produces a lot of noise pollution, and there's a school and a train station and a parking lot and some shops, and they all generate a bit of noise pollution. The other one is water pollution, which I should be able to show you. There you go. You see that body of water that I talked about a second ago? There's ground pollution that was produced by this industry. Even now has contaminated that water. We couldn't use that. Sewage is obviously the main thing, and you can see over time these little outlets here have produced sewage which has been washed away down the river. So if I ever want to get water to drink, it's not going to be coming from that, and that is something that I will have to address later on in the game. So pollution is something to pay attention to, particularly in the early game. Think about where you want to put things, and look at the wind to see what it's doing, because air pollution is difficult to deal with. Final tip, I want to talk about the city economy. This is a lot more complex in Skylines 2 than it was in Skylines 1. I have no doubt this will be expanded going forward with various DLCs, etc. City economy, right? So for the first 5 to 8,000 population, you will struggle to turn a positive profit down here. You'll just be losing money, but the milestones will generally give you enough cash to keep you going. In the early game, I recommend that you just import your power until you get to a point where you spend about 5k a month, something like that, and then just build your own power plant. But in the early game, just import it. It's the easiest thing. Taxes are a big thing. They always were, taxes. So if you look at taxation, generally speaking, I've found that this roughly works. So I like to keep my uneducated down 8%, then we go 9, 11, 12, 13. So just gradually scale it up as they got more money. And you can see the difference anyway. Like, it's not worth taxing these people highly because they can't afford it, quite frankly. Commercial, industrial, office, 12% works reasonably well. And you can see it generates quite a lot of income. If you're trying to attract more of it, then you can, of course, reduce it. And if you're trying to push a bit of it out, you can always increase it. You will get complaints when you get above about 12%, but anything between 10 and 12 is generally acceptable for that. Services, you want to look at this in the early game because you're going to have to try and save money in the early game. What you can do is when you do build your coal power plant, you can bring your budget down because you're going to be exporting power. You're going to be producing more than you're using. So you'll export it. You do get paid for it, but it's better just not to produce it. That way you won't, you'll get more money saved if you don't produce it by sliding the budget down than you will by spending a lot of money to make it and then not getting a lot when you export it. Same with things like the fire and rescue and police. You can dial these back a bit. Same with garbage management. Just save some money because it's just excess otherwise. Parks and recreation obviously is something that you can dial back or just not build parks. However, they do help your city to grow. But just consider reducing some of these. You will have to come back and put them back up later. Otherwise, if you notice, for example, you've dialed your city budget back on your electricity and you're importing power again, bring that back up to 100%, or consider building another coal power plant. Now, production is an interesting one. So keep your eye on production here because this kind of tells you what's going on within your economy in the industrial world. You can see, for example, that I produce a lot of grain and I still don't produce a surplus. I'm actually exporting some. But here, livestock, I'm importing a massive amount of livestock and only building a small amount of it. So one of the next things that I could do is build a specialized industry for livestock and try and offset this. It's much better to make stuff than it is to import it. Down here, you'll notice, even though I'm producing a lot of rock, I'm producing too much and I'm exporting it for a bit of money, so that's fine. Rock is used to produce things like cement and some other goods. But yeah, so if you want to do that, you would go and say, right, this is a massive import. Let's go and build some livestock. This one's trickier because this requires fertile land, and there's only so much fertile land available, whereas livestock, you can pretty much build in anywhere you like. But you can see where I built my my grain production over here. You can actually check to see where your natural resources are, and they will differ from map to map. So this is built quite literally on top of some land fertility there, so you can turn that on and off. This stuff over here is ore deposits, so you can use it to get things like metals and that kind of stuff. And there's oil deposits, etc. But when it comes to building, if you just want to build a livestock production plant, you can just come down to your specialized industry down here, click on that, and then click on your livestock farming. It says you can set up anywhere to produce livestock, whereas this one has to be on fertile land. So does that one and that one. This has to be produced in a forested area. That one can be put anywhere. Coal has to go on an ore deposit, as does the ore mining, and then oil has to go on an ore deposit. So with this, we could quite literally just go in there and build a new livestock ranch and basically offset. There is a bug in the game at the moment. You'll see a lot of these not enough customer things around. This is something that Paradox are aware of in the pre-release. If you do see this, it's most likely not you doing something wrong. It's most likely just a bug which will be patched after release. And that brings me to the end of my tips. I'm trying to keep this video short. Let me know if there's anything else you do want to know about the game, anything you want me to cover in particular, leave it in the comments section. Also, check out the video description. There is 10% off this game from our partner at Games Planet. Save yourself some money if you do want to buy this game. Check out the video description for that. Until the next video, guys, take care. Happy sim building.